Hello, my name is Michele Hu. I'm a neurologist from Oxford University, and I'm going to be talking to you today about digital wearable technology in Parkinson's. To date, around $23 billion have been wasted on failed drug trials in the quest to develop a disease-modifying therapy that might slow down or even stop the progression of Parkinson's. I've summarized some of the recent studies here in this slide. Reasons for this are multiple, but could be summarized as three main factors. Firstly, individuals with Parkinson's recruited at the time of their diagnosis with emergence of motor symptoms are likely to have been recruited too late in their disease journey. At diagnosis, most individuals will have a history going back at least 20 years of non-motor symptoms, including REM, or rapid eye movement sleep behavior disorder, where participants enact their dreams, or depression, constipation, and other features. Early diagnosis of Parkinson's can also be challenging, particularly when patients have not yet received treatments. Parkinson's can mimic other disorders. However, over time, with increased clinician review, the diagnosis generally becomes clearer and more accurate. The second reason is that Parkinson's is a heterogeneous condition, meaning that it has great diversity, both in how individuals present with their Parkinson's at baseline and how they subsequently progress in terms of motor function and cognitive function. An illustration of this is a study we led in Oxford, which looked at the Oxford Discovery cohort and combined with the Tracking Discovery Parkinson's cohort from the UK. These two cohorts are the largest incident cohorts. And what we were able to do was use an unbiased data-driven approach, combining all of the motor, non-motor, and cognitive variables to define 4 baseline clusters. How does this matter to digitals? Well, the important thing is that when you look at how the baseline clusters then went on to progress in the next 3 years, we see that very similar, mirrored both in the tracking and the discovery cohorts, but the difference between the fastest, most progressive cluster, shown here as cluster 1, and the slowest cluster, cluster 4, was equivalent to 3 motor UPDRS points per year. This is a clinically meaningful PD trial endpoint currently used. However, these differences shown are not related to the effects of a disease-modifying treatment, but simply due to diversity or heterogeneity at baseline. If we fail to account for this, we may have false positive or false negative trial results. Lastly, current measures may be inaccurate or insensitive to detecting change. Parkinson's is a slowly progressive condition. The MDS UPDRS-3 motor score is a human rating scale that is extremely popular as an outcome measure for clinical trials. Yet it relies on human raters who are subject to both intra and inter-rater variability, rating people with Parkinson's who may themselves be prone to fluctuations during the day. The graph on the left shows what is typically plotted as the mean score for UPDRS in the purple dotted line. This is shown here as equivalent to 2.5 motor points per year. However, in the spaghetti junction of different color plots, you also see individuals here with Parkinson's who fluctuated the most. And indeed, some individuals, like the participant in green, changes by 40 points over 4 visits. It is difficult to know whether this degree of change is true change or related simply to the inaccuracy of the measurement task. So digital wearables are united in their hardware, meaning that they all possess within them an IMU, or inertial measurement unit, which is then incorporated into an accelerometer, gyroscope, or magnetometer. Single IMUs cost around £100, but multi-sensor kits that can be bought on the commercial market can cost over £10,000. These sensors are divided in how they can be used. Is it better to do simple occasional measurements in clinic, or to get more frequent measures at home? Data can also be collected in an active way, where the participants asked to do the test at certain times, or in a passive way, where continuous gait, for example, is measured. The analytical techniques vary widely and are typically machine learning algorithm approaches. While the data, the raw data the IMU collects is similar, the output metrics can be collected in a different way due to protocols, and the subsequent application and calculation can also vary. Lastly, the level of clinical phenotypic detail is often less in patients who have had lots of digital recordings, as opposed to well-phenotyped cohorts, where typically numbers of digital readings might be quite low. Our aim is to apply digital wearables to empower researchers to improve their patient selection and outcome measures for patients undergoing clinical trials. We want to empower clinicians so that they can use digitals to inform disease management, to do remote telemedicine approaches, and to maximize available resources. And importantly, we want to work with people with Parkinson's to ensure that we can give them digital tools to monitor their Parkinson's and to facilitate symptom self-reporting, so that they are not a passive recipient of their Parkinson's care, but are actively managing their motor and non-motor symptoms. I've summarized some of the challenges here of digital wearables, both the device and analysis-based, patient-based factors, including maintaining privacy, accounting for diversity, and exposure to previous apps, smartphones, and computer and email use, and compliance or adherence, without which, and without the patient and caregiver engagement, digitals will not work. It is important to also recognize that digitals need to include patient-relevant outcomes, and that they may also provide metrics on hidden symptoms that up to now may not have been measured with standard questionnaires. FDA and EMA really have not produced clear guidelines on what digital endpoint criteria should be used in their validation. And this is something for those of us trying to develop these tools that can make life quite difficult at times. In OPDC, we've developed a 10-minute smartphone app that evaluates 7 aspects of motor function shown here, including speech, balance, gait, manual dexterity, reaction task, rest, and postural tremor. We can also look for asymmetry of signs by measuring tremor and finger tapping bilaterally on both sides, as well as measuring axial symptoms with speech, balance, and gait. The app, importantly, is nested within the Discovery Cohort Study funded by Parkinson's UK. This longitudinal cohort study recruited nearly 1,000 people with early Parkinson's in a Thames Valley population base of 2 million people, shown here in red. It also recruited nearly 300 people with sleep study diagnosed RBD in Sheffield, Cambridge, and Oxford. And lastly, we had 320 age and gender matched control participants. All patient groups took part in 18-month assessments, incorporating motor, non-motor assessments with imaging, biosampling, and additional digital metrics. Our first study looked at how well the single smartphone test could separate people with prodromal Parkinson's and early Parkinson's from age and gender matched controls. And using MLA approaches, we achieved reasonable sensitivities and specificities with overall separation accuracies of between 85 to 92%. Remember, this is based on the single smartphone test alone. No additional information is given to the computer to make the decision. Christine Lowe then took the smartphone test to see whether it could predict the onset of clinically relevant outcomes for people with Parkinson's. This included falls, freezing, impaired balance, cognitive impairment, the need for help with doing hobbies or general tasks around the home. And she was able, by doing smartphone recordings in participants who went from not falling to falling, to be able to predict these onsets 18 months before occurrence, with reasonable accuracies, again in the range of between 0.8 to 0.99, i.e. between 81 to 99%. One can then do an individual smartphone test in a participant at a particular time that will give a future probability of their falls risk, freezing, cognitive problems, or need for extra help with different tasks. And shown here, you can see the normal range where these smartphone recordings, people with measures in that red range do not need, have a low risk of going on to develop these problems, whereas individual patients falling outside the range have a much higher risk of these future complications. Christine Lowe has then spent many of the last 2 to 3 years developing an overall measure of motor severity using the smartphone app that we call a composite motor score. She's taken a number of existing clinical measures shown here to develop the composite score. She's then looked to compare it with the MDS-UPDRS Part 3, and she's shown that the composite motor score has lower variability relative to the mean, a greater score range, particularly in people with RBD and controls, where it shows less floor effect, and lastly, that it has greater ability to track longitudinal change over time. She's also been able to show that the 10-minute smartphone test can predict this composite motor score so that participants don't have to go through time-consuming investigations. Next steps for us in the app are to use it as an exploratory outcome measure in the exenatide phase 3 trial and to compare the performance of the app with the MDS-UPDRS-3 rating scale. And this will provide, for the first time, a direct comparator. I'd like to end by thanking all the participants in the study, as well as the researchers whose brilliance and perseverance have made this study possible: Christine Lowe, Siddharth Arora, and Navin Corey. Thank you.